what we can do is bring the best of ourselves to every situation and not come in with preconceived notions, ideas, or anything else. And ultimately, I think we're in a service business. And so I think there is no room for ego or a lack of humility.
Bejul, like everyone here in the Indian startup ecosystem, I'm also a huge fan. And let me begin with this quote, which I picked from, your Twitter. You wrote that I choose to be an entrepreneur. I am an entrepreneur. I'm an entrepreneur in the venture capital business.
So, no, thanks for those kind words. At Lightspeed, we are building a firm and we are building a franchise and we're building a business. And it's a competitive industry, just like what many of our entrepreneurs that we work with have to do. And so in that context, I think of myself as an entrepreneur that's building a business that happens to be in the venture space. But what that means is that we have to think about a lot of the things that we ask our entrepreneurs to. What's our strategy? What's our differentiation? What do we stand for? We have to raise capital. How will we compete in a competitive industry? How will we win? And perhaps most importantly, how do we attract the best people and enable them to do their best work? Because I am a real believer in sort of this idea that companies are really just collections of people. And so if you can attract the most talented people, if you can enable them to be the best versions of themselves, which is easier said than done, then that is a big part of building something special. And we have to innovate and we have to adapt. Again, all of these things that any regular company needs to do.
Yeah.
The spaces maybe that we're looking at today are different than the ones from 5 years ago. So we need to learn. We need to be constantly learning. And I think that's why I use the word entrepreneur, Shraddha, because every day we think about how we need to evolve, how I need to evolve as a person, as a partner to entrepreneurs, as a leader in our business, and as a firm, what we need to do to keep staying relevant and keep being the best partner that we can be to founders.
On your website, you have written that the job that you do or the work that you do, humility is very important. What do you have to say about that? And how do you look? What's the lens you use to evaluate whether someone has humility or not? Because I think
so I want to share the origins of this. No, thank you for asking this question. It's not often, something that's asked in the context of the business we're in. So thank you for picking on it. So Shraddha, the origins of this for me were when I was an entrepreneur in the US in the late 90s and was trying to raise capital. And I remember going up and down, Sand Hill Road and other places to meet VCs and feeling incredibly intimidated. And so, and I had, like I think any entrepreneur, a very mixed set of experiences as a result of that. And so, as an entrepreneur in the venture business, the one thing that's very clear to me, and I think to all of us, is we never want an entrepreneur to feel that way. Like I felt it. I really believe that if there is any power equation in this industry, it is in favor of the entrepreneur. Yet I think some people think it's the other way around. It is not the other way around. And so that's where it comes from, is I think anytime you felt a certain way and you say, hey, we want it to be different, right? That's number one. Number two is just the reality, which is our success rides on the work that entrepreneurs do. If we are successful, it is because they are successful. And we should just never forget that. I mean, that's the fact. And so I just think that at the end of the day, what we can do is bring the best of ourselves to every situation and not come in with preconceived notions, ideas, or anything else. And ultimately, I think we're in a service business, and so I think there is no room for ego or a lack of humility.
You were in a conventional sort of role, and then of course you were a founder yourself. Just want to understand the switch, and what does that mean
Yeah.
from operating role to being a VC?
Yeah. The hardest part, I remember this. The hardest part was, as an entrepreneur, you are used to so much action all the time, right? And there's, operating environments are fast paced. Every day you get feedback on how you're doing. Your customers will tell you, your numbers will tell you. And then I came into the venture environment and it was like, oh my gosh, like, I mean, it's the opposite of that, right? It's almost, it's somewhat cerebral, analytical, detached. It can be detached from the action. And so you're like, this just feels very unnatural, right?
Yeah.
And then what it can lead to, is it can lead to a lot of busy work, because I think we all identify somehow productivity and busyness with our worth or our identity.
Yeah.
You start getting busy, and then you realize, and you start questioning, or at least I did, am I busy on the right stuff? Like, does any of this matter? And in a business where you won't know if you're any good, and if anything you're doing matters, probably for 7 to 10 years, right? So it's like, oh my gosh, it's night and day. And how, and then you get to this more existential question of, am I any good at this? And I can just say that this business does not do wonders for self-confidence. It really tests it, and in a way that I think is different than operating environments. So that was a big adjustment. And then the other one, Shraddha, was, it's very easy to come into things, especially when one has been an operator, thinking that you know the answer, right? Mm-hmm. And therefore having a bit more of a prescriptive approach with founders. And I've learned that every situation is different, and also in any given situation there are potentially several different answers that are all viable, right? And so I think it's really caused me to, one of the things I've been working on is, how do I stay open-minded, objective, listen, and then apply my mind given the situation that is in front of me now, right? And to resist being prescriptive, and to actually help founders unpack their own thinking, because they're actually, again, I mean, in your business, like, you are closest to your market, you are closest to your team, your capabilities, you are closest to your customers. What can I possibly tell you that you don't already know, right? But maybe I can help you access some of the things that but you're not focusing on. I think it really is about helping people find their own answer. And one of the things that's often said about venture that I disagree with strongly is this idea of pattern recognition. I think pattern recognition is, I'm not going to use the word I was going to use, but I think it is, at a minimum, it is lazy, because no situations actually ever occur in exactly the same way, right? So when we think there's a pattern and now we jump to a conclusion, this sort of, and look, as operators, you have to do that, right? You're hard and fast. So this idea of being able to, kind of hold off of jumping to answers, and just being very present and listening, and resisting the urge to, parachute in and be prescriptive, I think was probably an area of my biggest learning.
So, Bejul, I also have to ask you about the third fund that Lightspeed India Partners raised. It's $275 million early
Yeah.
stage fund,
Yep.
and the total investment that Lightspeed has invested is already invested $750 million, right?
Yeah. Yep.
So congratulations, a huge recent announcement. Any change
Thank
in
you.
your investment strategy, sectors? Because right now there's so many things happening in this pandemic world.
I think sectors, Shraddha, will obviously always keep evolving. And one of the things that we do is we, at the end of each year, we'll look at what companies did we find interesting, in this last year. And then we also look at prior years. And I cannot tell you, I mean, if you look back at 2007, 2008, it's insane, right? The nature of the opportunity has just completely changed. So,
Yeah.
sectors, will consistently evolve. But contrary to popular belief, we are not dreaming up new areas. Entrepreneurs are dreaming up new areas, and we are learning from them and responding to them. I think really what's most exciting for us is this idea, and it's also disconcerting, is this idea that not a lot has changed for us. I think we continue to want to support really talented founders very early in their journeys to build what we hope and what they hope will be very large companies. And I think the one way we've operated really since the beginning is trying to be very first principles about what needs to exist in this country. It's nice to know that something worked in China. It's nice to know that it worked in the US. It's nice to know that, okay? But just because it worked somewhere else is not an answer to why it needs to exist in India, right? And in fact, one of our earliest investments, Indian Energy Exchange, in 2009 or 10 that we invested in, our partners in the US asked the question, where else in the world has this happened? And we looked, and the answer was nowhere. And then we had to explain why we believed, right, that it needs to exist in India. And I think that has been emblematic of the way we go about our work, right? Which is why does this need to exist in the context of this country at this time and in this market? Why does this need to exist? And I think that's led us to many, I would say, in a sense, these very uniquely Indian ideas, right? Whether it was Indian Energy Exchange in the context of the uniquely Indian power market, whether it was It's Cash in the context of a very heavy prepaid economy, whether it was Oyo versus more of a marketplace-like company, in the context of the economy segment in India, or BYJU's again, more full stack, or Udaan, where, people are saying B2B, B2B companies aren't worth as much as B2C companies, right? And so I think it's always been, well, let's look at the structure of this country, share chat, and so I think we continue to do that. We want to work with founders who are deeply connected to the market, and you get a sense that they're living and breathing and they're seeing something, that most other people aren't. And so I think we want to really just keep doing that. Like I said, the sectors will evolve in response to a constantly changing opportunity set.
Something which I really want to pick on is that, you don't believe in pattern matching. How have you consciously been able to,
Yeah. So Shraddha, the first thing I'd say is, see, when I say pattern matching, is not the right answer. What I mean by that is pattern matching may get you to 80% of the right answer, right? For example, I know, because I've made the mistake, that if you get into a company that, let's say, has, very high capital intensity and very thin margins and very high logistical complexity, and a founder that, isn't really switched on to the need to hire great people, then likely that situation will not be a good situation, right? So, but 80% isn't what it takes to win, right? So the value is in that 20%, right? We can all get to 80%, right?
Yeah.
So the value lies in that 20% where invariably you may be going against the pattern. Not because you want to be contrarian, but because when you ask these first principles questions, you end up in a place that actually is different than the pattern. Right? And I think when we do that, and if we get that right, is when you have outliers, right?
Yeah.
And ultimately, we are in the business of trying to identify and be a part of those journeys. Okay. And so I think it's necessary on one hand to say, okay, let me understand my mental chatter. There's a pattern I'm seeing. And then to consciously choose, okay, am I gonna let this impact what I do next? Or am I gonna, in this case, maybe I'm gonna be aware of it, but I'm gonna set it aside and I'm now gonna do the work, right? So I think that has to be a bit of a conscious choice. And in some cases we'll say, we've seen this before enough times that, okay, we're gonna not progress here. And then we may be right, we may be wrong. And then there'll be a set of times that, okay, I sense that there's some dots I'm connecting, but let me hold off. It's back to, let me not rush to judgment, right? Let me understand the situation for what it is. And then, one of the reasons that actually we continue to be fairly disciplined on our fund sizes, Shraddha, is to force this clarity, right? Because, yes, there may be money to be made here and here and here, in the same way that for a company could do 10 things. You could start getting into merchandising of your story, right? And you could say, I'm going to move into other markets and all of these things, right? But it's the same thing we also say to entrepreneurs. What are you going to win at? Right? So for us, sometimes it forces us to say, hey, yes, there may be money to be made there, but that is not for us. So let's do what we know how to do, what we think. Actually, I shouldn't say what we know how to do, what we think we know how to do, what we are equipped to do. And if there's something here that someone else is doing, but it doesn't make sense to us, or it doesn't fit our first principles approach, then that's okay. But you have to constantly reflect, because we'll get things wrong, and then you have to go back and say, okay, what do we learn from our errors and our misses? And one of the most interesting things, and I don't think I would have said this 5 or 7 years ago, is the most expensive mistakes we'll make are not the investments that we make and get wrong. It's the ones that we miss. And so then that leads to actually a very different introspection about some of this stuff.
I just want to understand that how do you go about your, of course you talked about this, but how have you got it right consistently?
So the first thing is I have not got it right consistently. Let's be honest with the data. I'm like anyone else, working in progress. I think that it's a very hard question to answer, Shraddha, because every situation is different, and it's not that when I make an investment, or when we make an investment, that something seems so obvious. There's a lot of questions, but I think that I really care a lot about, and I focus a lot on people. And it comes back to my earlier comment. Ultimately, I think, given how early we invest, if we get the people decision right and the market decision right, usually good things happen. But even if you just get the people decision right, then there's a reasonable chance that good things still happen. When you get both right, magic can happen, right? And then business model, the right people in the right market will evolve to the right business model. So I actually worry least about that.
Hmm.
And what I try and do is there's 100 reasons why a company won't work. Like if on every investment, it's like, right? So I try not to get bogged down in that noise of why something won't work, because I could write an essay on why any of these companies shouldn't have worked, wouldn't have worked. As every new company, the world is stacked against you. I mean, let's face it, right? Right? The ecosystem is not striving for your success. Actually, it's conspiring against your success. So I try and really simplify it down to people and markets. And is there sort of a strong tailwind as to why something needs to exist in this area? But I would say of all of these, I probably spend most time on the people side, and perhaps I think that's reflected in our willingness to invest as early as we have. In many cases, Udaan was company inception. Oyo, Ritesh had 2 properties. IEX was very early. One Assist and LimeRoad, we almost put in business. Some recent. So I think it's reflected in that willingness to go early, because I say this, which is early data. In my mind, it says nothing. We're all human beings, and if you show me early data, I can force fit it to whatever I want to believe.
Yeah.
I will find the stuff that I like, and I can find the stuff that I don't like, right?
Yeah.
And the reality is, data is not static. It will change.
Yeah.
And so I almost feel that when you're forced to make a decision in the absence of data, then you have to think most cleanly about the person or the people and the market. And it's scary, but I actually think it really forces clean thinking, because you can't now, pick some data and start, making a story about it.
What do you think are some of the drivers that have worked for Lightspeed India partners? What do you think are some of the things that you would say have not worked for our ecosystem and could be better?
Shraddha, as it relates to Lightspeed, I'm going to come back to something that that you've heard already from me. It's the people, and I just think the team that we've been able to assemble, is outstanding. And when you look at least our team, and I'm not suggesting this is different, I'm just saying it works for us, or right or wrong, it's a very diverse group of people, diverse in experiences, diverse in backgrounds. We're all shaped by our experiences, right? And so as we did this, we said, gosh, how can we bring people that just have had such different experiences to bear? Because in the face of this ambiguity, it's not about trying to find the right answer. There is no right answer. It is about trying to understand this ambiguity as fully as we can, and then make as good a decision as we can. Now, we can only understand something fully if people see it from different angles. Yeah. If we all see it from the same angle, we'll all see the same thing, right? But if I see it from this angle, and Harsha, because of her experiences in product and engineering, sees it from this angle, and Vaibhav, who was a doctor, sees it from this angle, and Hemant, who's been, an engineer and kind of comes from the enterprise, sees it from this angle, and Dev, who is the opposite of me, sees it in this angle, and Shuvi and Pin and Akshay, and I sort of feel like then we'll understand something, right? And so one is, it's the diversity of this team. And then the second is creating an internal environment where people can be fully authentic and they can say whatever it is that they want to say. There's no point hiring really talented, diverse people if then the environment says, don't take risks, right? So I think we've invested a lot in the internal chemistry and culture of the firm, so that people can really show up as they are. They can say what they think. They can take the risks that they need to take. And there's this sense of purpose which aligns us all, right? So we're all wanting the same thing, but the how we do it could be quite different, right? And if we can harness that, I just think that's so powerful. And then, externally facing, I think we have, because we've been fortunate to be in some of these companies that have really scaled, and we've learned so much along the way. There's an understanding of those journeys and of those people, and so we sort of, in a sense, know we think we know what we're looking for, and there is this hunger to have very high impact. And I think that's one of the things that leads to also a little bit of the selectivity that we have, right? Is we don't want to just be busy. We actually want to be most available to our founders. And so that does mean probably doing fewer things and then getting entirely behind them. And that's been a little bit of our approach. Again, it's not about right or wrong. But I think, and I hope, that's one of the things that founders who partner with Lightspeed experience is that real sense of commitment, and we're in this together. And I think that stems from this idea that we are in it together, because in this space, this is the only one that we have. So we need to be in it together.
How do you achieve this founders investor fit?
What is fit? What does it even mean? Does it mean that I like you and we'll hang out? Or does it mean that I respect you, but I may not want to hang out with you? Does it mean we should agree on everything and we should see the world the same way? Like, what does it even mean? Right? Yeah. And the way I think about it is we should understand each other. And I think founders and investors should understand each other. That doesn't mean that you and I may always, if let's say I was fortunate enough to be an investor in your journey, that doesn't mean that we will always agree with one another. But if we understand each other and we respect each other, then we will listen to each other. Yeah. And I think that's really important, right? It's not about who has the right answer, but it's, again, are we listening to the different perspectives? And is there general alignment? Yeah. Right. So, if a venture investor thinks that the way to win in this space is to subsidize the offering heavily and to scale very rapidly, right? But the founder does not believe that. Yeah. Right. You definitely want to figure that out before the money gets wired, right? Or vice versa. Yeah. So I think, one of the things we do, Shraddha, before any investment is we just spend time, with founders, obviously getting to know each other, but also talking about what's important, in the way that the founder is thinking about the business over the next 12 to 18 months. What are the things he or she is focusing on? And we often talk about this idea of milestones. It's not about numbers, right? But do we broadly align that product market fit is important, right? Before we scale. Okay. Now let's talk about what product market fit means. How will we know? What are the kinds of metrics we'll look at? Do we broadly agree that we'll want to make hires in these, let's say, these two areas? Okay. Let's talk about maybe what kinds of people these are. Let's exchange resumes. And so this is something that we do just to get a sense of, are we on the same wavelength? Yeah. And I think that is important, because this is a long journey and it's never a straight line. So conviction is always tested at some point in that journey. It is always tested. Yeah. The company will hit an air pocket and an investor will have to figure out whether they can take this leap of faith, right?
Yeah.
And I think it's, in order to make a leap of faith, you have to understand the other person, and you have to know that there is this fundamental alignment. And I think if those two things are in place, then, that partnership can endure.
Again, a favorite subject of mine, empathy. How have you looked at the last few months? How have you worked with your companies? And what would you like to tell the companies in whom you would have not invested but are still, struggling?
Shraddha, the most moving message that I got, this was, I think, in April or May, was from a founder that we work with. And at that time, lockdown. So, everything was, and he sent me this message saying, I just had to do the most inhumane thing I've ever done, which is to let someone go without even being able to meet this person in person. Like, I had to do it over Zoom. Right?
Yeah.
And, it just, that is tough for everyone involved. And it is so easy sometimes as VCs, it's numbers and it's on an Excel, and the cost is too high, so these things have to happen, right? And yes, there is a reality to that.
Yeah.
But I remember in the first startup I was a part of that, where we had to do a very significant cost reduction. The board brought in this advisor, and the advisor spent all of 25 minutes with us, and then said, "Let me tell you what you guys need to do," and basically said, "You need to let 80% of the people go. You need to reduce costs by that." And I remember thinking to myself, by the way, what I can say with hindsight, he was right. He was right. Okay. But he was also a jerk. Right?
Yeah.
So, because there was no empathy, there was no sense of understanding what does that mean to us, the relationships we have with these people, them, their family, all of these things, right? So this idea, we can get to the right answer, but we can do it with empathy. Like, these are not mutually exclusive, right? So, I think all of the companies that are out there that we work with, the most important thing is survival, because if we don't survive, then no jobs are preserved. Okay.
Yeah.
But I think doing things with humanity, with empathy, with transparency, these are ultimately, it's like, I think these are just foundational.
Yeah.
Okay. And so that's the conversation that we have. I actually think, the venture community came together quite powerfully in this, and it was this, act that formed out of that. But there were these conversations, and in the event that someone has to go, how do you provide them with access to ongoing healthcare coverage? How do you try and pool everyone's portfolio companies so that we can try and find jobs? And I think, that was important, and frankly, it was really nice to see, because it's important to us.
And we've seen an overwhelming number of startups have some, as they scale, some kind of a story. Just want to understand what you have to say, Bejul. And I'm asking you because I know for you, what I see of you, what I read of you, these are important things. So tell us, how do we build it the right way?
And Shraddha, this is something actually, I'd love to chat with you more about, because it's become more acute for me as well. And there's one word I also want to add in the things that you said, which is ethics. I've noticed actually a deterioration in ethics. I found one Monday we were having this conversation internally, where it turned out that a founder of a company that we'd been evaluating, had misrepresented the status of his financing.
Mm.
And we came to find out. So we were having the discussion, and there's a chorus of, hey, this happens all the time. Like, this is sales. So it was really interesting because, okay, it happens all the time. It's selling and pushing the envelope. Like, there's that, and it isn't harming anyone and all of those things. But there was something that didn't sit well with me because, the question I asked was, are we now getting into a discussion of when is it okay to lie? That if I'm lying to sell and my intent is pure, it's okay. But if I'm lying, but my intent is not pure, then it's not okay. And how, like, are we going to be the arbiters of all of these things? Like, that's getting into pretty gray area, right? But it was, I think, and I think what my eyes were open to, Shraddha, was there's a lot more of this in the ecosystem than I had appreciated. So maybe I was trying to inhabit a different world. And so I'm trying to now come to grips with exactly what you're saying, which is, gosh, it seems like there's more of this than I thought. Now, what does that mean, right? And at least, at the firm level, I think we're pretty straightforward, which is, so much is just built on trust. If you and I are working together and I call you and I say, Shraddha, how are things going, and how are you feeling, and what are you seeing, and you say things to me, then I build my conviction on the basis of those conversations, right? Now, if in those conversations I am being not told the truth, what happened, right? And isn't that also selling?
Yeah.
Right? So, my view is, if you can tell a small lie, you can tell a big lie. And so I think for us, it's pretty black and white, but there needs to be more conversation around this. And obviously ethics is easier, right? But like you said, when you get into values, those are more subjective, right?
Yeah.
And we can't impose our values on others, if it's ethically okay, but I think through the choices we make and the influence we have, we can say, look, these things are important to us. And I think that's our responsibility to do that. But no easy answers.
You've invested in some very good companies, phenomenal companies. What has been your assessment? Because you anchor on people. You anchor on people. You anchor on the relationships. How do you look at good entrepreneurs? Good is subjective, but still.
Yeah. I'll give you an example, Shraddha, of how I might answer this question, right? Which is, number one is, I think there are all different shapes and sizes of people and types of people that are successful. So, I think sometimes there is stereotyping done, and maybe we are exposed more to these brash, maybe, entrepreneurs that are very obviously force of nature type people. And so therefore one thinks that you need to be that way. And by the way, some people think that way for investors as well, that you need to be cold-blooded, right? And very clinical. And I've wondered that myself. But I'll give you an example, right? So sometimes you would meet entrepreneurs and someone, maybe the observation is, because there's an assumption that you have to be aggressive to succeed, right? So it said, hey, actually, is that the right word? Let's question the word. Because if it's aggressive, then I can show up with very positive body language. I can say, I'm going to win. I'm going to conquer the world. I'm going to build a $10 billion company. I'm in your face. I'm talking like this. I have high energy. And you may think I'm aggressive, right? That's all surface. That's all surface. So what is it that we're looking for? And this is the thing about people, which is, let's do away with the labels, right? What is it that we're looking for? And I'll take a cricket analogy. Was Rahul Dravid aggressive? He wasn't aggressive.
Yeah.
But was he incredibly intense?
Yes.
Was he a force of nature? Was he unwilling to give up his wicket? Was he persistent? Was he the epitome of determined? Was he resourceful? Could you count on him? Would he just grind it out? Yes.
Yes.
But
Yeah.
was he aggressive? Was he flamboyant? No,
No.
right? So I think it really is. Let's get into the essence of what it takes, and then let's try and get into the essence of who this person is. And and that's, I think, what I try and look for. And then what I found is actually the people that are most powerful are those that are most authentic and operating in a way that is most true to themselves. I think you feel it, right? You experience it when
Yeah.
you're in the presence of those kinds of people. It, again, not about right or wrong. And I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah,
saying
yeah.
they'll be successful or not successful, but when someone is lined up with their life's work, and it means something, like you can experience something that's different.
Right now, Bejul, in India, we are hearing this whole trend, which is hopefully a very positive trend of Aatmanirbhar Bharat, self-reliant India and made in India, and the tension with China. There's so many apps which have been banned. Also, many people are saying this is a great opportunity for Indian startups, Indian businesses to grow. I want to understand, what do you think? And second is, what would you like to tell all the entrepreneurs out there living through this pandemic and all this Atmanirbhar movement happening? What would you like to tell everyone?
I'm so excited by it. One of our partners, Hemant, has kind of spearheaded this "come home and build" idea, because there's been a lot of folks in the US, given what's happening there, that are really interested in coming home. And look, could we be more fortunate to be doing what we're doing in this country at this time, right? And that doesn't mean it's a straight line, but nothing is a straight line.
Yeah.
And nothing is going to get handed to us. But this opportunity in a country like this, at this time when the government is so committed to digital India, to entrepreneurship, to this idea of self-reliance, but yet not taking it to an extreme, right?
Yeah.
So I think it's so powerful. And when I look at, these entrepreneurs and I look at what they've done, it's actually incredible. I mean, in not that long a period of time, Shraddha, 10 years ago, if we'd been sitting here and we'd have said there will be companies that will be worth, 30 companies that will be worth north of $1 billion that do not exist today, right? That are in this variety of areas, that are started by people like anyone, right? A Ritesh, I know there's a lot of these things about IITs. Yes, young IIT grads, but also people who are not. BYJU doesn't have that kind of pedigree. Ritesh doesn't have that. I think we'd have said, you're crazy. You're crazy that will happen in 10 years. Okay. So now let's imagine what will happen in the next 10 years. And that, 10 years ago, there was no Aadhaar. The Aadhaar was not an idea. There was no UPI. It was not an idea. There was no Geo. It was not an idea, right? The largest companies were maybe $100 million type revenue. You didn't have this flywheel in the ecosystem and momentum. Yet we have come that way in 10 years. So now we have momentum. What will happen in the next 10 years?
Yeah.
I don't think I can answer that question, but what I think I know, or I feel in my bones, is it's going to be amazing, right? Now, what I want to say is the entrepreneurs will create that future, right? As they already are doing. And so, I just think it's an incredible time to be building. And I hope more risk capital comes into the market. I don't hope that as an investor, because it's more competition for us, but I hope that for entrepreneurs, because it's sort of the catalyst for people to go on their journeys and go in pursuit of their dreams, which I think is incredible.